Khurram, Frank Cora, welcome to PubKey. We're back. It's been a little bit of a hiatus. December and January always get a little bit sideways here at PubKey, I would say. But
okay.
This is a good one to come back with. We have KD for AG in New York.
It rhymes, so you know it's true, right? That's the.
So, I mean, we're going to cover a lot of ground, and we have a great event tonight to, open back up the free and open to the public Bitcoin programming here in NYC. Let's dive into it. Frank, you're the one that put this together. Why don't you help us set the table?
Yeah, so I met Khurram at one of his fundraisers a few weeks back. I saw you on, I think it was Eleanor Terrett's show, Crypto in America, and much like Thomas and everybody here in the New York PubKey Bitcoin community, we're all very hopeful that one day the infamous bit license will one day be gone, which we'll get to here in just a moment. But I think the biggest thing is that I think your name is starting to get around in Bitcoin circles. But I want to give you a little bit of some space here just to maybe introduce yourself a bit, talk about some of your experience as a lawyer in the crypto industry. You've worked for some notable companies and also experience in capital markets. And then maybe we'll dive into what the current problem in New York is with Letitia James and more broadly with the regulation that exists.
Sure.
So let me.
There's only one problem.
One problem.
Sorry.
A lot. Listen, electing a new AG overnight would make this state a better place to do business and a better place for crypto. Like overnight, I really believe that. And so that's a big part of the reason I'm running. But to your question, as far as background, I've been practicing law for a little over a decade. That's really the only job I've ever had. I went to college and then straight to law school. Moved here in 2011 to go to Columbia Law School, and I've been in the New York City area pretty much ever since. I've lived in New York ever since then, but I did do about a year and a half abroad in New Jersey, and so that's like my go-to New Jersey joke.
Nice.
Started my career. Yeah, wonderful people. They're very great. They're very great people. But that's my New as a New York aspiring New York Pole. That's my joke across the river. I started my career as a capital markets lawyer, just like Thomas, and as a corporate lawyer, your job is basically to give advice. You're not a litigator. I wasn't going to court, not a trial lawyer. But I was broadly familiar with securities laws. And in 2017, I had some friends that were getting really into crypto. I myself was interested. And I had a friend that joined a company that I guess now we call them layer ones, but at the time it was just a crypto company or crypto project. I brought them to my law firm as a client. That was the first client I ever brought anywhere, and it happened to be a crypto company. We really just called them projects at that time. And I became the crypto associate. I think I was the first associate at Oric whose entire full-time practice was focused on crypto companies and projects. And it was mostly, you had builders that wanted to launch blockchain networks and launch tokens with the network. And shortly after that, I had the opportunity to join a startup in Brooklyn called Fluidity that built one of the early decentralized exchanges on Ethereum called AirSwap. I was the first legal hire there. Incredible team. And the company ended up getting acquired by Consensus, advised some projects in the space for a little while after that. And then in 2022, I landed on the policy team at Coinbase. This was at the height of their back and forth with the SEC. I was able to work on a portion of the petition for rulemaking that we submitted to the government. And, I don't know how many companies, write a petition asking the government for regulation. But rather than getting an answer, they got sued. And, that was a really interesting experience for me. And shortly after being on the policy team at Coinbase, Bain Capital Crypto had reached out. Bain Capital had a ventures arm. They still have it. They have a ventures arm. And they started a dedicated crypto fund. So I joined the team as essentially regulatory and policy counsel, and I ended up leading regulatory and policy at the fund.
Which is a big part of investment due diligence.
Especially on the crypto side, on the crypto side. And really, I think that the reason I was hired was because I had that experience of company side, in-house working with startups and trying to be a resource for all of our portfolio companies that at that time during the Biden administration were just navigating a very chaotic regulatory environment. And I was doing that up until the summer when I decided to leave and run for AG. And so, very much, I describe myself as a crypto lawyer, even though that's like not really an area of law, as you know, per se. It's more that I'm a regulatory and policy lawyer, and I've spent most of my career working in the crypto space. A lot of the more traditional political journalists, I think, throw the crypto stuff at me as a kind of insult because they think it's scammy or kind of out there. But I proudly wear it. I mean, I love this community. I feel like I'm part of the community. And I think what folks in crypto went through the last few years was not just unfair, but wrong.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because there's this narrative, like if you only got your information from the New York Times, you might be under the impression that, these like good old regulators during the Biden years were just trying to make sure companies followed the same rules as everybody else. And crypto folks didn't want to do that. And so they poured a bunch of money into DC and now they're getting everything they want. And Trump has, he's invested in crypto companies and that's why this is all happening. And that is such like insane levels of revisionist history.
100%.
It was not inevitable that all of this was going to happen and that, my career starting in crypto and that crypto would be such a big policy issue, that only happened because of all the lawfare and the way people felt targeted. And the one thing that I'll say in the second half of my career spending it in policy, politicians only move if they feel like they're going to lose their job. That's the only thing to get politicians to do anything. They have to feel like there's some electoral risk. And we got involved, we organized, we got folks active, we raised a lot of money. And as a space, we won a lot of huge victories. And now I think not only are we, gone are the days of sort of moving backwards, we're back to neutral and now we're making a lot of progress. So that's my background, very much part of the crypto community and proud of it.
A direct through line in terms of the questions that we get at PubKey, just because we hosted Trump and we hosted a lot of politicians, hosted a lot of Democrats, but they talk mostly about the Republican ones and they talk almost exclusively about the visit that Trump paid to PubKey NYC. And I try to reframe it exactly the same way. People really don't understand just how badly maligned the industry was by the previous administration, how galvanized and pissed off, Bitcoiners, specifically Bitcoiners, are more like anarchists and libertarians. Like they don't want to get involved with this shit unless they absolutely have to. And it got to the point where they really had to. And it was expressed in a lot of different ones. And I think it's still there. Going into the midterms and with what you've seen so far in terms of, starting your race and you're about to like go into an absolute sprint. I think it starts.
we're in it right now because we have the convention in three weeks from now. So, this is it. We're in the thick of it. Because
you saw it for the last election around Trump and Bernie Moreno and other ones. What do you make of sort of the crypto, like Bitcoin vote? That voter cohort, is the intensity still there? Is it a bit muted this time around? Is it gearing up? Like, what's your experience been so far with these folks?
I think the crypto voter is real. The Bitcoin voter is real. There are so many folks. I mean, you mentioned the partisan aspect of it. I mean, I know personally people who are independents, who are Democrats, who said, you know what, I just saw somebody lose their bank account because they happen to work at a certain company. This isn't right. And so I think there's broad-based appeal. Look, midterms are always harder to get more people excited about than, presidential elections. And the progress that we've seen from this administration is really unprecedented. Like you can't find examples, I think, where you have like a complete 180-degree shift as quickly as we've seen. And what I tell people in our space about the midterms and about 2026, which is when the AG race will be here in New York, is if you are happy with all of the progress that you're seeing out of DC, then you have to care about state AG races because state AGs can undermine so much of the progress being made because one thing about this office that a lot of people may not realize on the general public or even the voting public, and really even political circles, a lot of people don't know this either. State AGs have evolved to be regulators of last resort. That's the way a lot of them see themselves. And so what you'll see is when the White House is controlled by one political party, all the state AGs of the other political party will band together and just sue like crazy to block policy changes. And so, I just spent, a significant portion of my professional career fighting for crypto projects, for crypto builders, for crypto entrepreneurs to not have to deal with arbitrary enforcement and lawfare. I'll be damned if all that work in DC, then all that progress that we've made is undermined by a handful of activist state AGs who just want to make a name for themselves. And so I think 2026 is going to be a huge year. Whether we get market structure through or not this year, whether the balance of power changes, I'm still very bullish on DC. I think just the personnel choices, all of those folks from tech and the venture community that joined the administration, they all have staff. Those folks will rotate into other offices, maybe themselves, will become elected officials one day. We're also in a post-Chevron world. We're in a world where a lot of these litigation victories have changed the government's approach to how they're going to do things. So I don't think we're ever really going back to the Gary Gensler days, but the battle for the next 5 or 10 years is going to be at the state level, not just for crypto, but lots of frontier tech, prediction markets, AI. A lot of this is going to be a question of state versus federal, and how all that shakes out, I think will be really significant to our space.
Can I jump in there if you don't mind? Yeah. So I want to, for people who aren't as familiar with the situation here in New York, Letitia James, the current AG, well known for lawfare, well known for, just outwardly speaking very poorly about this industry, and sort of in blanket statements, not necessarily, no nuance, right? Just it's kind of maligned in this state, if you will, under her. So maybe if you could set the stage a little bit of what it's looked like in New York for a while, and then sort of what you think it'll continue to look like if she wins again. Is she going to feel more empowered to go even harder on the offensive against this industry? And then also, what will be in your power to reverse? What especially considering what's happening at the federal level, what can you augment? What can you sort of protect in the role as the AG if you do get elected?
So the role New York will play in crypto policy and regulation, unless Bruce Blakeman and myself are elected in New York and we get a change in party, the role, if she's reelected and we don't have a change in Albany, is going to be very negative. Because their entire framing is going to be anything that the Trump administration is doing, they're going to be against. All of these policy changes, whether it's the enforcement approach, whether it's banking, whether it's all the progress we see at the market regulators. She will no doubt revive some of those cases that we've seen. We've seen it in other contexts. I've heard from a number of people that a lot of folks that were at the SEC in the last administration or at the CFPB have obviously left, and they've landed at state AG offices, or they've landed at private law firms who are pitching cases to state AGs, basically saying, hey, I was working on this case, when I was at this agency. Why don't you pick it up and you can have this headline of you're, bucking the administration or you're filling a gap.
Ridiculous.
And so New York was already a bad state for crypto as it relates to the end user, the retail investor, the crypto participant, the user. It's ironic because so much of our community is based here in New York City. So many companies want to be here. So much talent is here. So many of the venture funds are here, and yet we see routinely that products and services are not offered to New York residents. And you'll see in the fine print of the terms of service, it'll be like New York State, right? Yeah. Iran, Venezuela, like
it's good. It's good.
It's just Syria, like we're in there with all the sanctioned countries, in terms of prohibited jurisdiction, and. I think it's only going to get worse if we continue to see federal progress. It's going to almost sort of open the door for states, particularly states that have elected leadership in the other party, to say, "Hey, we need to fill this gap." And so, I think it's really important. And the reason I got in this race, and part of the pitch I make to donors, is there's a huge opportunity for asymmetric upside here. If we are able to get a different AG than the one we have now in New York, I really believe overnight it would change the climate here in New York. You wouldn't worry about arbitrary enforcement. You wouldn't worry about all of this, regulator of last resort trying to fill federal gaps. You'd see just an explosion of economic activity. And in terms of the second half of your question, what we can do, there are lots of things the AG can do. This is an office where everybody that's had this office for the last 30 years just kind of does whatever they want with it. It's expanded so far, and my argument actually is that the reason we see so much lawfare is, when you expand the office and say that you can do policy making and you can do, you can be the sheriff of Wall Street or the sheriff of State Street, or you can use it to sort of take on industries that maybe people in your political party have an issue with and score some political points. It's only a matter of time before somebody does what Letitia James does, which is, I'm just going to straight up openly use the office because the ends justify the means, and we're going to go after Trump, whatever we can find on him. We're going to go after crypto, whatever we can do. I mean, you saw Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA. He's worked on a bill with Senator Zelnor Myrie they cleverly described it as a licensing bill, but you already need the license in New York. It's just changing violations from being civil to criminal so they can have more leverage.
So it's an expansion. It's an expansion of the bit license in a way where criminal liability attaches
exactly.
to
And it's kind of like, first of all, why is the Manhattan DA writing legislation?
It's a bit confusing.
I think there's a lot that he could be spending his time on other than that, prosecuting criminals and making our streets safer.
Right.
So I'm very concerned about where New York is going and the role it'll play nationally. Obviously, we have the bit license. We can talk more about that in a minute. But there's another aspect of New York that's unique, which is the Martin Act. And you've seen some folks in crypto point this out. The Martin Act is New York's anti-fraud statute. And unlike federal the federal equivalent, there's no intent requirement. So somebody, and you have to kind of think about it hard to wrap your head around it for a second. What it basically means is that in New York, you can be liable for fraud, even if you didn't intend to deceive someone. And you're thinking okay, what's the scenario in which this happens? Well, let's say you're an investor and you yourself are being defrauded by SBF. SBF is lying to you. Right. You're a victim, actually, but you repeated the information to a business partner or to your investors. Right. Yeah. And SBF is gone and the money's poof, but you're an investor with deep pockets. So we're going to go after you and we're going to say that you should have done more diligence. Yeah. And this law has been used really expansively. Elliot Spitzer is the one who really took it to a different level. And I think it's abusive. Part of my platform is scaling that back. And the other piece is that, if you spend less time on lawfare, you have more time for other things, right? Like keeping people safe, but also doing a regulatory audit. We have, across the political spectrum in New York, everybody agrees. I mean, even Zoran Mamdani is running ads about cutting red tape and all the regulations in New York. Cuomo is doing the same thing. It's funny because their friends are the ones that have created a lot of this, but that's sort of besides the point. This is a state that has the second most regulations of any state in the country. And it's also the second worst place to do business. And I think those two are connected. And so I would do a comprehensive audit of all of our regulations in the state to ask the first and most important question: are they lawful? Is this regulation passed with the proper authority? And if they're not, we should not have those regulations. And I think that's something that could also unlock the state and grow business. And one of those regulations that I'm sure we're going to spend a lot of time about is the bit license. Excuse me.
I don't know if you want to dive in from there, but yeah, the bit license, for those who don't know, has made it extremely difficult. So it's a license that I guess on paper doesn't seem too difficult to get, but only 36 companies have gotten one. Usually takes months and months of administrative, bureaucratic nonsense, red tape. Usually costs upwards of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Millions. It's in the millions.
To get a bit license. Okay.
When you look at like the delays and everything, most companies that are in the running for one and that it would be really meaningful and impactful, that those companies usually get pushed into the millions because they hire the firms that are probably best equipped to go to war. Maybe some are able to get it like cheaper. I know that there's like a cafe in Brooklyn that has one from like the olden days. Wow. It probably wasn't millions there, but like I think you're in the millions these days.
And I think the greatest irony here, right, is like New Yorkers, I don't know, like this is the city of capitalism, free market. It's like, really? And you can't do business with the future of money and finance? Like, you can't do that. That kind of stuff can't happen here without going through immense amounts of bureaucratic hurdles. So the bit license has existed. It's what, 2015? Yeah, 15. If you could give a little background, we were talking off camera about this, that it never went through the state legislature. It was never something that was passed. It's
not a statute.
It's not a statute, right? So could you give us a little background on it, and then we'll dive into what it might take to repeal something like the
this
bit
expansion
license.
Wouldn't be a statute either.
No, I think they want to make a statutory change so that the penalties
I see.
can be criminal. But it's not. I don't know if it's. I haven't read the actual text, or I can't recall.
Sorry to quickly tangent, but
No,
but would that then codify the bit license into statute?
No, I think what it says is that violations, like not having the license, would be subject to criminal penalties, not just a civil violation.
That's another weird
It's
legal
just like
fiction
to me. It's just like I think it's just they want to have more leverage.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
Give people the settlement table. Yeah, I mean, look, there's a perception among a lot of people in the press and outside of crypto that crypto is like this big wild west and like nobody has licenses and there's no regulation, which is insane. Not true. And basically oversimplifying a bit, but anybody in the United States that is taking custody and control of anybody's crypto is operating with some kind of license. Coinbase has money transmission licenses in every state. All of the on-ramps, anybody that does any of that exchange, custody, these are all either licensed with MTLs or they have bank charters. And 45 states, if you want to do any kind of currency exchange, you get a money transmission license. So whether you're Western Union, PayPal, or if you're doing crypto exchange, you get one of these licenses. And it's a state level license. You need it for every state you operate in, and then you register with FinCEN. Subjects you to AML and BSA requirements. New York decided in 2015 that, unlike the rest of the country, they were going to develop a virtual currency licensing regime. But instead of being a substitute for the money transmission license, it's just another license. So for example, if you want to do an on-ramp in New York State, you've got to get both of these licenses, right? Which is kind of strange. You would think like, okay, maybe it makes sense. You want to have a different license for crypto exchange versus, fiat exchange. I could maybe see that. But it's strange to have two of them, have them both. So that by itself is a little bit tricky. The other point, most people don't realize this was not passed by the state legislature as a separate statute. This is a regulation that DFS, the Department of Financial Services, came up with relying on their existing authority. Again, it's like a first in the nation type thing that they always talk about. It seems like the type of thing that should have gone through the legislature rather than the regulator. And lastly, DFS has a reputation kind of for arbitrary enforcement, not being the most transparent. And we've seen that with people having difficulty getting through the application process. And again, another irony of this whole thing is a lot of the people who are proponents of these types of regulation are also the people talking about how, we have to stick it to all of these big companies that are taking advantage of the system. But what they're doing is they're actually making it so that only really large companies that can pay millions of dollars to the best lawyers can get these licenses. And that actually contributes to a kind of inequality in the private sector of companies where this is a great state if you are really rich or a really big company. Like, of course, you hire all the lawyers you need and you'll be able to operate. But if you're a small business or you're not insanely wealthy, it's very challenging to be in New York. And that's the piece of it for me that is most frustrating, that a lot of these regulatory barriers, there are all these downstream second and third order impacts. It makes it more expensive to be here. It reduces the number of companies here. Yeah. I mean, I really owe a huge amount of my career to the fact that there were two guys that, had enough money that they didn't need to do it, but decided to start a company in a new industry. And they hired a team and brought people on, and that gave me experience that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, that led to another job and another job. And, you think about how that multiplies. We have a great thing. I know like there's like a lot of negativity around America these days. And like, we've got a lot of problems, of course. And
fuck that. It's great.
But at the end of the day, one thing that we do amazing, still better than anybody else, is we have this like crazy culture where people want to like, build and innovate, and we have got a great educational system and great capital markets. We have so much fucking money here that people can invest in these things, and people who built other things have made so much money that they can angel invest. And you have this just incredible sort of feedback loop of innovation that really no other country has. Even China, which is like our big adversary and the only other big country that you could really compare to the US. I mean, my understanding, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but it's very much a kind of symbiotic or I don't know, parasitic or some kind of relationship that's, they are very much riding off of a lot of the innovation that happens here in the United States. And so I think we should be really careful with playing around with that and saying, hey, we're gonna do things that maybe limit the amount of economic growth we have because we want to check some box on a ideological spectrum of things that we're being tough on. So that's the background on BitLicense and why I think it's problematic.
Deeply problematic. I mean, one of the things, and you were kind of getting at this, in capitalist systems, one of the concerns is trending towards monopolies. With something like the BitLicense, it looks a lot like legal risk and compliance structures in other areas of financial services, whereby all of the entities that have a BitLicense really enjoys having one because it creates a regulatory moat. And not to pick on Coinbase or anybody else, but at a certain point they start to look a lot more like JP Morgan and really enjoying that compliance or regulatory moat. So I think
and the regulator starts to look a little bit like extension of the industry, right? You end up an SEC that's full of people that work in the industry, right? And so it's this kind of weird revolving door that ends up.
And I think some of that was expressed in the market structure debate. You had the community banks come out very angry about competition and what Coinbase was looking to be able to offer, and a couple of other things as well. But
how fragile does your business have to be that if some stablecoin rewards are going to
I would say quite fragile,
disrupt all the especially since I don't know. I mean, can't think of ever getting I can't remember ever getting any interest from my bank account balance.
Not since 2000, not since the great financial collapse.
Right. So what?
It's like artists getting a check from Spotify where it's like 12 cents.
What are we talking about? It's just like nonsense.
But I think the bigger to set a backdrop for people, a friend of the bar here, Jorge Gerasati, who's Venezuelan guy. I was speaking with him in D.C. one day, and this is someone who's traveled the world. This is someone who's from Venezuela. Obviously, doesn't need to be described what has happened there. This is pre what just happened there. But he said something. He said there's a spirit that needs to be maintained in America. That's the main thing that he sort of works towards, and he wants to see that spirit alive in his, in Venezuela one day or wherever else. And it's just that idea of like, and he's joking. He's like, it's just two guys at a bar, kind of thinking like, yeah, we can do it. Yeah. Let's go do that thing. And he's like, and you need that. You need people to feel that way. And when you impede upon that with too much regulation or like, let's go do that thing. Nah, we got to go do the paper. You don't want to take that spirit away. It's a real thing. Totally. It's not completely tangible, but it is a vibe, and this is New York. And the fact that we're dealing with some of the things we're doing, the regulatory weight that sort of sits on this state and on this city, it's a lot. And to know that many people have left as a result of it, it's quite depressing in terms of what New York is supposed to be. I
mean, to your point, I know we were picking on Coinbase a little bit, but
it's okay.
A great example of like, two guys in an apartment in San Francisco build a YC company. And one of them was, Brian Armstrong was working at Airbnb, which itself is like, the quintessential Web 2, success marketplace company. And so it's like, think about like the sort of ripple effects of that. And Coinbase is arguably the biggest crypto company, in the world, or the most successful or biggest brand, whatever you want to call it, to the point where, people were making jokes about it. It's like starting to look more like JP Morgan or something in the future. But like, that's exactly the spirit. And I think people are, particularly in policy and in the political world, people are so cavalier about it that like, we'll just do this thing here. And like, it makes it hard for these guys, but like, who cares?
Right.
And it's just, it's really unfortunate.
Brian is more than welcome to come back to the church. He started. Coinbase was extremely important. We got a little distracted for a little while there, but the stuff he's saying in Davos right now, I'm loving it, and he's always welcome back to the Church of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But this is a big complex issue to unpack. Help us understand where. So the bit license is a big issue that you're connecting with voters and the Bitcoin voter cohort and other ones. Sticking on the bit license for a minute, tactically, where does it sit? Who does it roll up to? How is it destroyed? You got the DFS, which I believe only reports to the governor. Right.
That's right.
But help me understand the other touch points and how it can be limited by the AG's office. Would it just be sort of like a non-enforcement approach or a lighter enforcement approach? Like, help me understand how it links to the AG's office.
So the most expeditious way to gut the bit license is to elect Bruce Blakeman as governor in New York. Because
for clarity, Bruce is running for. He's a Republican candidate.
I don't believe he said anything public, directly about the bit license yet.
I don't believe he has. Yeah. I'm going to do everything I can to get his people's ear.
Certainly a better chance with him than with our current governor.
Right. And so DFS rolls up to the governor. The governor would also decide who runs DFS. Mm-hmm. This is important because a little birdie told me that some high level people at CFPB that in the prior administration that are interested in taking the helm at DFS. And so, if it goes the other way, you could expect a DFS that maybe is, looking the way that Elizabeth Warren might try to run DFS, which would not be good. So getting a new governor would be huge. Getting a new AG would be very helpful as well. And tactically, the ways you'd go about it, one is the enforcement piece of it, how you decide to use your enforcement discretion. But there's a few others. I mean, one is if the bit license is challenged, the AG could decline to defend it, essentially. Mm-hmm. The AG could, not just decline to defend it, they could also, the AG could take a more offensive approach and potentially make the case that, hey, this is a regulation that's either unlawful or that's infringing on the constitutional rights of New Yorkers, the economic rights of New Yorkers. So I think there's an angle there. There are things that can be done, also working in tandem with the governor. And so I think that there are ways that the AG can have a role. I think the bit license is susceptible to challenge. And the three sort of big things that jump out are: one, not passed by the legislature when it probably, in my opinion, there's a case to be made it should have been. And whether DFS actually has that authority under the existing financial services law. Two, the fact that it's duplicative of the money transmission license. My take on it is that you're basically treating the same activity more onerously depending on the rails that you're using, essentially. Why is it the case that somebody that wants to do crypto exchange would need to get a virtual currency license and the money transmission license? So that doesn't make a lot of sense. And the combination of that, I think, could amount to, an infringement of the rights of New Yorkers and entrepreneurs in the state. And then lastly, even if you think that, it doesn't need to be passed by the legislature, DFS has the authority, and it's totally fine that there's two separate regulations. The fact that in practice, only 36 companies have been able to do it, right, when this is basically the crypto capital of the world, and it costs millions of dollars to get in. Then also people forget about the ongoing cost, right? You basically have like kind of supervisory relationship. You need to have a compliance person, and like all of that compliance and legal spend is money that could be spent on hiring another engineer, sure, or building a better business. Instead, we get higher prices, higher legal costs, and fewer companies, right? Which means fewer jobs for people in the state. And so those are the three areas where I think it's most susceptible to challenge.
So we wrote a report, an internal report here at PubKey, because we've had a lot of these conversations with policymakers and aspiring policymakers. Shout out to the Bitcoin Policy Institute and the Bitcoin Voter Project for helping us with just, incredible data, specifically on, the Bitcoin voter cohort here in New York and elsewhere. And when we present this data, it's shocking because you're able to boil it down to office space, jobs, corporate tax revenue. Like this should be pretty straightforward. There's a lot of money that New York State, New Yorkers have missed out on: jobs, offices, economic activity, and
Staking
then
rewards.
I'm not the Bitcoiner here pining over the loss of corporate tax revenue going to New York State. However, it should be in the consideration for a lot of policymakers. There's a cookie on the shelf. By getting rid of the bit license, you are unlocking a lot of economic activity, and you're getting a lot more revenue coming into the state. But for whatever reason, there's much darker forces at play here that seem to really enjoy this stuff being in place.
I think the bigger question too, is it darker forces, or are we attributing to malice? What is a lack of understanding? Are they not seeing this picture that Thomas just painted?
Well, it's interesting. It's like maybe it's a mix of both. I mean, it's not that I don't think that people that advocate for some of these policies are intending to harm the state or intending to, cause, less economic growth. I think if it was, that'd be great, actually, because it'd be easy. It'd be like, you guys are just bad people. What are you doing? It's actually, I think, a little bit worse, which is they think they're doing this great thing. They think
protecting
that they're
kids
protecting
and stopping
everybody.
terrorism.
They think that they're.
How would you like this wrapped?
They're trying to exactly. They're trying to. They paint it as though, listen, all the process and the lawmaking piece of it be damned. Like this ends justify the means, and I'm doing the right thing because this stuff is all scammy bullshit. And it's kind of like shadow merit regulation. And so I think that's where I assume a lot of people look at it and they say, well, I just don't see the utility of the stuff. So, whether it's done through a regulatory process or through the legislature, like, who cares? Like, we just got to get it done. We got to be tough on these people. So that's where I think it lands for a lot of people.
I think that I agree with that. I think that that's definitely. I think back a little bit to what we were just joking about with the community banks and the fragility of the bank of the business models there. In the early days, in the olden days of Bitcoin, back in 13 and 14, it was about merchant adoption and remittances, and some of that technically wasn't quite there yet. We didn't have the Lightning Network and other stuff, but there was a lot of power in the idea of just completely undermining credit card fees and merchant processing fees and correspondent banking fees and remittance fees. These are big businesses that, like, the promise and potential in Bitcoin, I think, scared the shit out of a lot of people who did a little bit of work, and they were like, maybe snuff it out, because some of the activity that you saw even before the NYDFS came out with the bit license, there are interviews with Chuck Schumer going after Russell worked in the Silk Road that were, I don't know, a little surprising how much they had actually dug into the meat of the technology. And Silk Road was a different issue, but Bitcoiners were really at the time talking about the power and potential of what it could deliver to the end user, the plebs, right. Particularly around remittances and merchant processing fees. So I think it definitely is both. Like, it might be a little bit aw shucks now that it's already in there, and like, I don't know if the NYDFS even knows what the Lightning Network is, right. But like, exactly. Who knows?
It's lobbying too, right? It's and there's a history of this in New York. I mean, Wall Street. If you go back to the late '60s, there's a lot of. I did a bunch of research for a paper on this, a year or two back, and you look at DTCC and DTC and the clearing houses and how we have equities today that are all basically, like, the way that they did this is because there was so much paper changing hands in the late 60s, and a bunch of broker dealers failed, and you had this paperwork crisis because people couldn't actually settle trades. They decided, and this was done through amendments in Congress to the Securities Act, to basically create this centralized clearing and settlement system where, again, oversimplifying, but all the stock certificates would just sit in one place, and rather than them changing hands, you have ledger entries that are
Seed and Co.
essentially right. Exactly, they're all in the name of Seed and Co. Capital markets lawyer here, recovering lawyer. So
Why do you think I got into Bitcoin? I learned too much.
You saw it, and so that whole process was actually, if you go back to that period in the late '60s, and I think there was the Securities Act amendments of the 1975 or something like that. Not a lot of people even know about this part of those amendments because that wasn't the top line. The top line had to do with fixed commissions. And there was this fear that changing that was going to leave New York hanging at a time when New York's economy was not in a good place. And as a kind of kickback to Wall Street, the idea was like, well, we're gonna give you guys this whole clearing and settlement business, basically, as a way to make sure that there's still business on Wall Street, because commissions were going to get driven down to zero. Basically, was the thought process, or very low. And so you see this type of stuff happening all the time, and you'll see it now with banks lobbying, and crypto has made a huge splash in DC, but there are other industries that have been around DC much longer. I think the ABA is I think it might be the longest running trade association. I think it's I don't know when the ABA was started. Maybe I check after, but I think it's really old. Yeah. So a lot of this stuff is just, we're new to DC also. And, you have other people that have been there for a while, and they've all the great work that we've done the last few years, think about, all these different trade associations and banking, how long they've been doing this and how long they've been having those conversations and relationships with people in Congress. So part of it is probably just that, everybody acting in their self-interest and trying to protect their business.
Yeah. Individuals can accomplish amazing things when they're too dumb to understand why they should be afraid. So I think that that'll play to our advantage a little bit.
We skew heavy towards that.
I want to give us time. We got time for a couple more minutes.
I know
that you have a bunch of questions.
No, I'm good.
As well. I want to
just want to make sure we have to get down there for the
about 6. And we're going to take a break. I have one last question. Yeah. And this pertains more to sort of the Bank Secrecy Act. We were trending in that direction anyway.
Unconstitutional.
Thank you. Oh, love it.
You feel that way.
The BSA is not constitutional. The third party doctrine is just.
That's actually that's great.
It's on the chopping block. Sorry, I interrupted your question.
It's a third rail. Very few people in DC will even touch this, let alone the Patriot Act, right? A couple people will touch the Patriot Act, but not so much the BSA.
Yeah, the BSA, the premise of the BSA, and the reason why it's not a constitutional violation of the Fourth Amendment, I believe, is this idea of the third party doctrine, that if you even though you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in certain information, if you give it to a third party, you lose that, which seems a little bit odd. But in this day and age, it's not just odd, but really concerning, because so much of our information is with third parties.
Yeah, exactly.
And just because we do that, I don't think we all expect that we don't have any privacy. But it's an interesting one to watch, because there was a case, I think, involving geolocation data or cell phone location data a few years back. I can't remember the name. It might be Carpenter or Miller, one of those two. I could be getting mixed up, but the upshot is that in that case, Justice Sotomayor, who's I think not seen obviously as a more conservative judge or a Republican appointed judge, obviously not. She was writing in her opinion that she had a lot of concerns about how expansive the third party doctrine is, and so I think if this issue does get before the court, I think there's a very, very real chance that in the near future, we will be looking at a world without the BSA. Now, it's interesting because you mentioned the Patriot Act, and the national security crowd, I think, is going to, they
go
love
bonkers.
Both of
these. The combination of the two is
they're going to go bonkers.
For sure.
I mean, no one is I don't want any kind of financial crime any more than anybody else, but you should do the work to investigate and get a warrant if you need to.
The last one though, BSA, Patriot Act, we talk about them a lot. We've covered the privacy trials quite a bit here at PubKey.
Samourai
Wallet, Tornado Cash, BTC Fog, the mixer.
Yep.
A lot of those happened here. a fair amount of it did. Samourai happened here. Frank, you covered, those trials and everything.
Yeah, tornado cash.
Just at a high level, what did you think about how this all went down with Bitcoin developers?
Again, another example of a policy disagreement that should be hashed out somewhere else, not in these cases.
Yeah.
There are people in the policy world in DC who believe that the best thing to do is that we should hold the people who create something responsible for third-party bad actors who do something illegal. Because maybe it's really hard for them to track down or to do the work of going after all those individual bad actors. And they would rather just go after a few people and make them register or do some kind of licensing or just do whatever they want. And so we see this come up in lots of different contexts. But in our world, of course, you're talking about software developers that are making something, oftentimes open source, and some bad actor does something illegal with it. And the US government is going after the person who wrote the software or who developed it. And, I understand why, from somebody who's got like their national security hat on, why they want to do that. But, we have laws in this country. And I just think that, it's what's happened in the Samourai Wallet cases, what happened in Tornado Cash. Not only does it set a dangerous precedent, it's just wrong on the law in a lot of the cases, in many cases. And I know there's, like some gamesmanship around like which statute they're referring to and how they come up with these cases. But it's just, it almost feels like these cases are like trying to send a message. And I saw it firsthand because I remember, I've worked with some really incredibly talented founders who were trying to build in the privacy space and were doing everything they could to try to not put themselves in the position of Tornado Cash or Samourai by doing all of these extra things to try to limit bad actors from using their software. And many of them ultimately just decided to pick up and leave and not to build it because they were concerned that they were going to get hit with some kind of criminal action. And it almost feels like that was the intent behind some of these cases, to throw the book at a few people so that, we just don't have to worry about this. And privacy is one of those all the time where, we have a constitutional right to privacy, in our papers and our effects and you don't have to have a reason for it, right? This idea that like, oh, the only people that want privacy are the people that are going to do crime. There's all kinds of reasons.
No amendment has been beaten up so badly as much as the fourth has.
Yeah, it's
and
just,
now a lot of developers, you either do it like Satoshi or you don't do it at all.
Yeah,
exactly right.
But Frank Corba, thank you so much for putting this together. This was fascinating. KD for AG. I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more of you over the next year, and I'm really excited to follow your race.
And look, if you're inclined to support, go to kdforag.com. It's kdforag.com. In politics, you got to raise money. Fundraising is really important. So if anyone's listening and you like what you're hearing, please go on, support our campaign. Even a small donation helps, especially with the matching funds here in New York that can get multiplied. So please consider supporting our campaign.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.